February 24, 1944, 22,000 feet above Gotha, Germany. The temperature inside the fuselage is 40 degrees below zero. It is a cold so aggressive it feels like a physical weight pressing against your chest. Sergeant Mike Reynolds can't feel his toes inside his heated flight boots, but he doesn't have time to worry about frostbite. The air around his waist gunner station is filled with a deafening, rhythmic clatter, the sound of four massive Pratt & Whitney engines fighting to keep 30 tons of aluminum in the thin air. Suddenly, the world turns violent. Black puffs of flak erupt off the right wing, sounding like gravel thrown against a tin roof. Clang whump, clang whump. Bandits 3 o'clock high, the top turret gunner screams over the intercom. Reynolds swings his .50 caliber machine gun, the heavy steel traversing on its mount. Through the plexiglass, he sees them, Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving out of the sun like angry wasps. Tracers streak past the B-24 Liberator's nose. A sickening rip tears through the fuselage behind him as 20 cannon shells shred the aluminum skin of the bomber. This is the B-24 Liberator. It is faster than the B-17, carries a heavier bomb load, and has a longer range. But it is also boxy, ugly, and incredibly complex. To the men inside it, it is a flying fortress of solitude. To the German flak crews below, it is a target. In the next 10 seconds, flak tears the number 3 engine from the wing. The bomber shudders, enters a flat spin, and begins the long, terrifying fall to the German countryside. 10 men bail out into the freezing slipstream. That specific B-24, with its 300,000 rivets, miles of wiring, and sophisticated hydraulics, took a team of skilled craftsmen months to build. It took the Luftwaffe 30 seconds to destroy it. This was the terrifying math of World War II. The Axis powers were betting that they could shoot down Allied planes faster than the Allies could build them. And in the early days of the war, it looked like they were right. Flashback 3 years. January 1941. San Diego, California. The sun is beating down on the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation. The mood here is very different from the freezing skies over Germany, but the tension is just as high. The United States is not yet officially at war, but the writing is on the wall. President Franklin D. Roosevelt has just issued a staggering demand to American industry. He wants 50,000 airplanes a year. It is a number so large it sounds like a fantasy. At this moment, the U.S. Army Air Corps has fewer than 3,000 planes, many of them obsolete. Walking through the consolidated plant is a man who looks out of place among the laid-back California aeronautical engineers. He is wearing a sharp suit, and his eyes are scanning the production floor with the predatory focus of a wolf. This is Charles, Cast Iron Charlie Sorensen. He is Henry Ford's production chief, a man who has spent decades perfecting the art of making cars fast, cheap, and by the millions. What Sorensen sees in San Diego disgusts him. He sees the fuselage of a B-24 sitting in the middle of a yard under the open sun because the factory floor is too small. He sees highly skilled mechanics filing down pieces of metal by hand to make them fit. He sees blueprints being consulted every few minutes. He sees a process that is more like building a custom Swiss watch than a weapon of war. The consolidated engineers are proud of their work. An airplane is not a car, Mr. Sorensen, one of them tells him, sensing his judgment. You can't just stamp these things out. The aerodynamics, the stress loads, every rivet has to be perfect. Sorensen watches a team of men struggle to fit a nose cone. It doesn't fit. They take it off, file it down, and try again. To Sorensen, this isn't engineering, it's a hobby. You're not building airplanes, Sorensen mutters, his voice dripping with disdain. You're building custom furniture. The consolidated leadership is asking Ford Motor Company to manufacture parts, wings, maybe some fuselage sections to help them speed up. They want Ford to be a subcontractor. They think the car guys can handle the simple stuff while the real engineers handle the complex final assembly. Sorensen shakes his head. He does the math in his head instantly. At this rate, Consolidated might build a few hundred bombers a year. Hitler is conquering Europe with thousands. If the United States is going to survive, the craftsman approach has to die. He turns to the Consolidated executives. I don't want to make parts, he says flatly. I want to build the whole damn plane. The room goes silent. The aviation experts look at each other, trying not to laugh. A car company building a 4-engine heavy bomber. An automobile has perhaps 15,000 parts. A B-24 Liberator has over 450,000 distinct components. You don't understand the complexity, Charlie, they tell him. You can't put a bomber on an assembly line, it's physically impossible. Sorensen doesn't argue, he just stares at the half-finished plane baking in the San Diego sun. He knows something they don't. He knows that in war, impossible is just an engineering problem waiting for a budget. He returns to his hotel room at the Coronado Hotel that night, his mind racing not with wings and propellers, but with conveyor belts, overhead cranes, and timing cycles. He sits down at a small desk, pulls out a piece of hotel stationery. Some accounts say it was a placemat, and takes out his pen. He is about to design a machine that will eat raw aluminum at one end and spit out a fully functional heavy bomber at the other. And he plans to do it at a speed that will break the mind of every German strategist in Berlin. He is about to design a machine that will eat raw aluminum at one end and spit out a fully functional heavy bomber at the other. And he plans to do it at a speed that will break the mind of every German strategist in Berlin. The early hours of January 1941. Coronado Hotel, San Diego. The room is quiet save for the scratching of Sorensen's pen. He isn't drawing a plane, he is drawing a river. On the hotel stationery, he sketches a long central spine. This is the main assembly line. Feeding into it, like tributaries feeding a mighty river, are smaller lines. Wings come from the left, fuselages from the right, engines drop from above. In his mind, the B-24 isn't a static object sitting in a hangar. It is a constantly moving stream of parts. He calculates the timing. If the main line moves at a specific speed, the wings must arrive at exactly the right second. There is no filing, no adjusting. The parts must be perfect before they even touch the main line. It's the philosophy of the Model T applied to a machine of war. By 4:00 a.m., he has the rough schematic of the largest factory the world has ever seen. He calls it the Grand Canyon of the machine age. When he takes this sketch back to Detroit, even Henry Ford, a man who is no stranger to ambition, is stunned. The plan calls for a factory floor that is 1 mile long. A single room under one roof large enough to have its own weather system. They choose a location, Ypsilanti, Michigan. It's a quiet farming area known for its willow trees and a small stream called Willow Run. But when the government hears the plan, the skepticism turns into open hostility. The experts in Washington and the aviation industry are laughing. You want to build a mile-long factory for a plane you've never built before, one general asks. Mr. Sorensen, by the time you finish pouring the concrete, the war will be over. They have a point. The sheer volume of raw materials needed to build the factory is staggering. They need 33,000 tons of steel for the frame alone. They need millions of bricks. They need a workforce of 40,000 people in a town that barely has 4,000. Sorensen ignores them. He knows that if they build the planes the old way by hand, one by one, the Allies will lose. The construction begins in April 1941. It is a war against mud, snow, and doubt. Crews work 24 hours a day. Farmers watch in awe as their fields are devoured by steam shovels. A massive complex rises from the earth, a gray concrete monolith that stretches beyond the horizon. Inside, the machinery is equally terrifying in scale. Massive die stamps the size of houses are installed to crush steel sheets into wing sections in a single blow, work that used to take 3 men a whole day to hammer out by hand. By late 1941, the building is largely finished. It is magnificent, it is terrifying, it is the most advanced manufacturing facility on planet Earth. But there is one massive, glaring problem. The factory is finished, but the B-24 Liberator is not ready for it. The blueprints from consolidated aircraft are a mess. They were designed for craftsmen who could fudge the fit with a hammer. They were not designed for the cold, unforgiving precision of mass production. Sorensen stands on the catwalk overlooking the empty mile-long floor. The silence is deafening. The critics are already whispering the nickname that will haunt Ford for the next year. They don't call it Willow Run, they call it Will It Run? And for a long, painful time, the answer looks like no. Sorensen stands on the catwalk overlooking the empty mile-long floor. The silence is deafening. The critics are already whispering the nickname that will haunt Ford for the next year. They don't call it Willow Run, they call it Will It Run? And for a long, painful time, the answer looks like no. Summer 1942. Willow Run Assembly Plant. The heat inside the factory is stifling, but the atmosphere among the engineers is even hotter. The Grand Canyon of the machine age is open for business, but instead of bombers flying out the doors, chaos is reigning inside. The problem is a fundamental clash of cultures. In San Diego, Consolidated Aircraft is still tweaking the design of the B-24. They are used to soft tooling, flexible jigs that allow a worker to hammer a piece of aluminum until it fits. If the Army asks for a new gun mount, they just sketch it up, cut a hole, and patch it. But Ford uses hard tooling. Sorensen has invested millions in massive cast steel dies. These are permanent molds. You put a sheet of metal in, a press comes down with the force of a freight train, and a perfect wing section pops out. It is fast and efficient, but it has one fatal flaw: it cannot handle change. Every time Consolidated sends a telegram saying, "Move the oxygen line 2 inches to the left," it is a disaster for Ford. A change that takes a handyman 5 minutes in San Diego renders a 10-ton steel die in Michigan completely useless. For months, the factory floor is a graveyard of expensive mistakes. Piles of scrapped aluminum grow higher. The assembly line starts and stops, jerking along like a dying car. The workers are frustrated. These are men and women who came from the auto lines. They are used to rhythm. They are used to speed. Now they spend half their shift waiting for blueprints to be deciphered. The press begins to circle like vultures. The newspapers run headlines mocking the project. The billion-dollar boondoggle, they call it. Politicians in Washington start asking if the money should be pulled. They argue that Ford's arrogance has sabotaged the war effort. Inside the plant, the pressure is physical. Sorensen is working 20-hour days. He looks at the soft blueprints from the aircraft designers and realizes they are mathematically imperfect. The B-24 is slightly different on the left side than the right. The rivet holes don't line up on paper, so they never line up on the machine. He makes a radical decision. He stops trying to follow Consolidated's lead. He orders his engineers to take a finished B-24 apart rivet by rivet. They measure every single piece. They redraw the entire plane, translating the art of aviation into the science of automotive engineering. They create 30,000 new die casts. It is a gamble of epic proportions. If they are wrong, the factory fails and the bombers never reach the front. Meanwhile, the labor force is struggling. Willow Run is so far from Detroit that workers are sleeping in their cars in tents or in hastily built bomber city shacks. The winters are brutal. The turnover rate is terrifying. Some months, Ford has to hire 3,000 people just to keep the workforce stable because 3,000 others quit. But slowly, amidst the mud and the mockery, the hard tooling begins to click. The massive dies are finally set. The ray-drawn blueprints are finalized. The steel monsters start stamping. April 1943. A distinct sound begins to fill the cavernous hall. It isn't the chaotic clanging of construction anymore. It is a hum, a deep, rhythmic vibration that you can feel through the soles of your boots. The conveyor belts begin to move, and this time they do not stop. The critics are still laughing. They say a car company can't build a plane, but they are looking at the past. Inside Willow Run, the future has just engaged the clutch. The critics are still laughing. They say a car company can't build a plane, but they are looking at the past. Inside Willow Run, the future has just engaged the clutch. Late 1943, the assembly floor, the hum becomes a roar. If you stood on the balcony overlooking the main line now, you would see a sight that defies human comprehension. The river Sorensen sketched on that hotel placemat is flowing at full flood. The assembly line moves continuously. It doesn't lurch, it glides. It travels at a steady creep, pulling the massive aluminum skeletons along a track that seems to have no end. Above, overhead cranes drift like steel clouds, lowering 5-ton wing sections with the delicacy of a feather. They don't need to be hammered into place anymore. Because of the hard tooling, the rivet holes on the wing align perfectly with the rivet holes on the fuselage. Click, snap, rivet. This is no longer a factory. It is a choreography of 50,000 people. Women, the famous Rosie the Riveters, stand on elevated platforms, their rivet guns rattling in a unison that sounds like heavy rain. They aren't mechanics, they are specialists. One woman does nothing but install the hydraulic line for the landing gear. She does it 400 times a shift. She can do it with her eyes closed. She is faster than any master craftsman in the world. The efficiency is terrifying. Raw bauxite ore enters the system, is smelted into aluminum, pressed into sheets, stamped into parts, and assembled into a bomber. The pilots waiting at the end of the runway don't even turn off the engines of the delivery trucks. As soon as a plane rolls off the line, it is fueled, tested, and flown away. By early 1944, the numbers become insane. The German intelligence reports cannot believe what they are seeing. They estimate that a heavy bomber takes weeks to build. At Willow Run, a completed B-24 Liberator rolls off the line every 63 minutes. Let that sink in. In the time it takes to eat a casual lunch, Ford has birthed a 4-engine heavy bomber. Every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One pilot who picked up a plane from the factory described the scene. It was like watching a giant vending machine. You put a coin in and a bomber falls out. This is the moment the war is truly won. It isn't won on the beaches of Normandy yet. It is won here in Ypsilanti. Because for every plane the Luftwaffe shoots down over Europe, Ford is building 2 more to replace it. The Axis strategy relied on the idea that war is a contest of warriors. Sorensen and Ford proved that modern war is a contest of logistics. They turned the B-24 from a precious artifact into a disposable commodity. And as the calendar turns to 1944, this disposable commodity is about to darken the skies over Germany. The impossible factory is finally running at full throttle, and the sheer weight of its output is about to break the back of the Third Reich. The impossible factory is finally running at full throttle, and the sheer weight of its output is about to break the back of the Third Reich. Spring 1944, the skies over Europe. The result of Charles Sorensen's crazy assembly line is now visible from the ground in Berlin. It looks like a plague of locusts made of aluminum. The German flak gunners, the ones who felt so confident in 1941, are now looking up in despair. They fire their 88 cannons until the barrels melt. They shoot down 10 bombers, then 20, then 50, but the next day the horizon is dark again. General Adolf Galland, chief of the German fighter forces, later admitted the crushing psychological reality. It wasn't the skill of the pilots that defeated them, it was the numbers. No matter how many planes the Luftwaffe destroyed, the Americans simply sent more. The B-24 Liberator becomes the most produced military aircraft in history. Over 18,000 are built, nearly half of them rolling out of Willow Run alone. The custom furniture approach of the Axis powers collapses. While German engineers are still obsessing over the perfect tank or the perfect jet engine, Ford is drowning them in good enough bombers. August 1945. The guns finally go silent. The great assembly line at Willow Run winds down. The roar of the presses fades, replaced by the quiet chirping of birds in the Michigan countryside. In less than 4 years, the American auto industry didn't just build cars, it built the arsenal of democracy. It took the concept of mass production, invented to make transportation affordable for the common man, and weaponized it to destroy tyranny. The B-24 was not the prettiest plane of the war. It wasn't the easiest to fly. But it had the one quality that mattered most. It was there. It was there in the thousands. Charles Sorensen, the man who sketched a river of bombers on a hotel placemat, proved a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Bravery wins battles, but logistics wins wars. Germany had the best engineers. Japan had the most dedicated warriors. But in the end, they were crushed by a force they couldn't shoot, bomb, or intimidate. They were crushed by an assembly line that moved every 63 minutes.